He says, I've recently read Thomas Paine's Rights of Man and also Burke's reflection on the revolution in France. Paine seems very optimistic, but also smug-ish about the French Revolution and obviously criticizes Burke at regular intervals along the way. But having read the two books back to back, I find it hard not to agree with Burke and think Paine is being misguided in his optimism. I guess my question is, in your opinion, does Paine have a good argument regarding the oncoming revolution in France, and does he make any valid points? So now that we've had these 2 weeks of conversation, I think we're very equipped to talk about this question. Tom Paine, big figure, of course, in the American Revolution, somebody that people are often apt to cite as part of it. 1791 writes the response to Burke on the French Revolution, basically like pro-Frenchies, where Burke has decried them. Paine begins by saying, well, it must be said, bit rude, don't you think, unprovoked, to talk about how bad another country's revolution is. But the more substantive debate and disagreement between them has to do with exactly the questions that we have been discussing. First of all, it must be said and confessed that Paine is less than half the intellect Burke is. And that's just, it vitiates the conversation. It mars the conversation because rather than a kind of sensible exchange between two great thinkers, what we have is one great thinker and one sort of pamphleteer. I'm not a big fan of Tom Paine. So you'll predict my argument that I don't really think he makes cogent objections to Burke, but I do want to read a sentence from Paine, a couple sentences from Paine, that will say why in a revealing way to add to the conversation we've been having. Paine writes, man has no property in man, neither has any generation a property in the generations which are to follow. That which a whole nation chooses to do, it has a right to do. And he's responding here to Burke's objection to the idea that the French have the right to frame a government for themselves. This has been claimed by certain pro-French pastors in England. Burke objected to this notion because he didn't think that you have the right to just up and restart a new government any day of the week, that you just decided to do it. And Paine is an extremist about about the consent of the governed, essentially. And you can see why he is part of this American spirit that we can, rise up and throw off these shackles. Also very Rousseauian to think, well, you get your liberty back. Your liberty belongs to you. You gave it over and you can take it away. The problem is that this is actually not really how social contracts work. It's not. Opponents of social contract theory will often point out that, you never consented to the American Constitution. I mean, you do. Socrates might say you do by continuing to live here. You can go somewhere else, but you didn't sign up. Yes, I agree. The American government. And many people live in America who are bound by her laws, but don't like the Constitution, as we have seen, right? So the validity of the social contract can't be founded simply on each person positively choosing to take on the government when they come to maturity, right? And the reason for this is that Paine is very wrong. He's right that man has no property in man. That's a central principle to the abolition of slavery, right? Man cannot own another man. Neither has any generation a property in the generations that are to follow. He's very wrong about that. Not because we somehow own our children, but that he's misconstruing the sense that we have an inevitable effect on relationship with and responsibilities toward the generations before us and after us. And this is why Burke says that society is a contract between ourselves, the dead, and the unborn. And this is the proper understanding, in my view, of social contract theory, that by writing the Constitution, the founders made a deal with us, with you and me. And we, just as we don't choose to be born, we do not choose, therefore, to enter into that contract, but we also have a responsibility, right, to preserve that contract for the future. This is why C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man insists that all decisions we make about science today will not just be decisions for us, but power that we exert over the future generations, right? How will they grow up? How will they be shaped? How will they learn to think about themselves and their souls? This is the crucial question before us today. And unless we understand that we are in this trans-temporal contract and that we do, in fact, have unbreakable links between ourselves and future and past generations, then we will go terribly astray and we will go into chaos like the French Revolution did. That's why it was chaos, is because they didn't have this sense that, well, there's only one reason to break the ties, and that is, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary because of the usurpations. You have to have the contract broken in the sense of actual usurpation of your natural rights, systematically and entirely. And that's what they thought George III had done, and that's why they rebelled, as opposed to this idea that, well, you can just do it anytime. If we all agree, if everybody today got together and voted to upend the Constitution, would we have a natural right to do so? Paine says yes, right? That which a whole nation chooses to do, it has a right to do. I say no, and Burke says no.